This is Lecker. I'm Lucy Diller.
So also, another light bulb moment, do you know when you're putting something on the grill and you're trying to sear it and you think it's lost its heat, all you do is you move it round your grill, because this is going to be warmer than underneath there, because that product has actually lowered that temperature down. So all you do is you keep moving it round.
In a yard on Welbeck Estate in Nottinghamshire, Sally Ann Hunt is dancing between her many different barbecues. There's a neat red ceramic egg, a long sleek contraption like a black stretch limo and an oil drum had a baby, and two historic looking setups taking centre stage, giant iron bowls with fire in the middle and various delicious things on and over them, a leg of venison, rolled up hispy cabbage leaves, a tiny cast iron skillet of toasting pine nuts, and my favourite thing of all, a shawarma spiced cauliflower, imprisoned in a spherical iron cage, suspended by a serious looking hook and chain over the fire.
When I butchered it, I separated the lean from the fat to make sausages. When I make sausages, it has to be a certain percentage, a ratio of lean to fat. Usually 80-20 when you're going that way. So I took the fat out of there. I usually get about 30 kilos of beef fat out of one animal, and I render it down and I use that for everything really, mainly for frying chips in at home. It's the old-fashioned way of doing it.
Candles out of that?
I've done that before, so I've made candles out of beef tallow.
Sally Ann is a tutor at the School of Artisan Food on the Welbeck Estate. She teaches barbecue, smoking and curing, pie making, sausages, dairy and foraging. She's one of the most creative and resourceful people I've encountered in food, and seems to be always looking to try out exciting new techniques and ideas.
This is called a flamberero or something, right? And I've got a friend on the estate, told you everything's got a story, called Joseph Dawes, and he makes the armour for the royal family and also all of the weapons for the Game of Thrones. So I buzzed him, I said, I need one of these. 10 minutes, he said, I'll get you sorted. 2 hours later, I got one. Yeah. So all you do with that is when it does it, it just drips over it. Yeah, you can see. And it's so you don't get burnt on your arms. Duck's the worst thing.
You'll be able to buy one of these though.
You can buy them from Cadai, but they hadn't got them in stock.
Do you not have a personal armourer?
So do I.
You're not close to our loop.
So we'll get that one out.
Along with a dozen or so others, I was very kindly invited to a press day at the School of Artisan Food earlier this year. We all attended 3 mini versions of some of the courses that the school offers as a way of letting people know about this year's summer school. Sally Ann's barbecue workshop, a bread workshop with baker Kevin Roberts, which I have to admit I did not record because my hands were immediately so coated in dough I couldn't touch anything, and a patisserie workshop with Martha Brown, where we somehow made chocolate and hazelnut amaretti and honeycomb in a suspiciously short amount of time. It felt like wizardry.
So I might be able to turn it up. So the magic number for us today is 146 degrees. So that's the temperature that we're going to take our caramel to before we take it off the heat and add our bicarb. And our bicarb is there to give it volume. That's what turns it into honeycomb. If we were to cook it to 146 degrees and then we were going to just pour it out into a bowl, it would turn into a rock hard, clear caramel. But what we want to do is aerate it, and so we're using bicarb. So yeah, now I'm pretty happy that I'm not going to get any more sugar crystals around the edge of my pan. I'm now going to work my way around, just like pushing all of that down. I haven't taken the temperature yet because it's not all melted and come together. Yeah, these induction hobs seem to be hotter towards the back of them, so you're going to set your pan kind of off-centre. Nothing's ever just even, is it? Like every oven has a personality.
Martha actually started out attending the school herself, doing the Advanced Diploma in Artisan Baking in 2011.
Yeah, so there we go. So we're at 146. We've hit the magic number. So I'm going to remove from the heat, important. You don't want to be putting your bicarb.
You've got to see the magic.
Gonna see the magic. So this is essential. That's ready. It's in a location there you don't have to move it, so you're not going to burn yourself moving it. My bicarb's a little bit lumpy. I'm going to pour it all in, and then I'm going to whisk violently. And it's going to climb. still climbing, I'm going to pour, sorry people at the back. Be so careful not to touch any of this caramel because it will stick to you while it's burning you. So, and then we're now not going to touch that because we actually don't want to knock any air out of it. We want to leave it alone. It is going to sink. It completely sinks. That's normal. It's magic. It is literal magic, isn't it? Alchemy.
I think a lot of people have that kind of completely foundationless dream of like, wouldn't it be nice to have a cafe or something, I don't know, something food related. And I think I was like, I might make biscuits for a living. I don't really know what. Like, I was
Little did you know.
That seems manageable. And I was like, yeah, maybe biscuits. And I think I was just randomly saying this to a friend one evening. And he said, oh, there's no artisan bread in Sheffield. And I don't think I even knew what the word artisan meant. And so I was like, yeah, there's no artisan bread in Sheffield. And I went home and I Googled artisan bread and the school came up and I was like, oh, that's such a cool course. Like, because I definitely knew the difference between like better quality bread and the kind of industrial supermarket bread. Food has always been a massive part of my kind of upbringing, and like I've always been really into food. So I've got kind of Cypriot family and kind of English Scottish family, and both sides very differently. A lot of my memories from childhood are wrapped around food, whether it's kind of like Cypriot barbecues and being handed a fork with a bit of like barbecued lamb on it to run around the garden, you know, by my like babu, or kind of my Scottish grand baking, you know, it was food. It was always has been massively tied up in my memories. Like literally my Greek granddad used to come up to Sheffield to see us with a suitcase not full of clothes but full of food, you know, like Cypriot bread from Green Lanes and like, like just full of halloumi, you know, that. So yeah, I think when I saw the course and that it wasn't that far away from me and that maybe I could either like commute or it wasn't a far move, I kind of thought like, actually this is something that I am really interested in, even if it's not bread specific at that time. I was just really interested in food and hadn't gone to uni. I'd kind of dropped out of school, I only had GCSEs, so never thought that I would be kind of academically studying. So yeah, I thought the school was my version of university and a chance to kind of expand my interest in food. I totally got obsessed with baking and bread and sourdough and pastry while studying. So the diploma while I was there was a year long, and you could study bread and patisserie, you could do butchery and charcuterie, and you could do dairy. So there was quite a real interesting mix of people and a real interesting mix of subjects. It's kind of the school of the fermented arts. And most of us were kind of living together in a local village. And so we had all sorts of things growing in our kind of student accommodation throughout the year. So it was a really amazing year of discovery of kind of food and fermentation for me.
When you started the course, was it like an instant like, oh yeah, this is where I need to be? Because that must have been quite intense to just suddenly go into because it's very, you know, you learn some very advanced skills, right?
Yeah, I think it's really accessible though at the start. It was a lot of kind of real basic techniques, and also just I think what's unique about the course was that there was such a good amount of practical time to really get into the nitty-gritty of just like every single ingredient. It was, yeah, you know, we spent probably the best part of a week thinking about like salt in bread and being able to do lots of tiny little experiments on the, you know, dough and salt and just the difference of that water made, or the difference that, you know, that kind of theory and time to play, which I think is really difficult to get professionally when you're working in a bakery and there is production and there is like this kind of constant cycle. I was in my early 20s and it was kind of my uni experience, and I was like, so I feel like I could have even got way more out of it than I did. That time is quite unique in that you're not working, you're not at work and you're not in the grind. Yeah, it is really precious. And the estate and the school, there's so many other things going on. I don't think I stuck myself into everything that was going on in the estate, because also at the time I was playing roller derby and I would like, so I was really, really, really deep into roller derby. So I was kind of going back to train like 3 times a week. So I was kind of being pulled back to Sheffield.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Like, roller derby and bread were fighting for my attention.
And I guess, like, you know, there's a similarity in that you'd come to both of those things, I imagine, not really knowing anything about them, or like having to be thrown quite in the deep end in like a very physical experience.
Yeah, I think maybe that's what I'm into. Yeah, I seem to get really into things.
No, I love
and
that.
then really go for it. Yeah. The term like that just kind of has haunted me in my personal life and at the bakery was like Martha likes a project. And I think as soon as I've kind of got like headspace from one project, and then like, now we can do this.
This experience of kind of full body immersion learning was really the thing that I wanted to explore when I knew that I was going to make an episode about my day at the school. Watching all of the tutors working and teaching that day, it felt impossible to me that I could learn to do what they can do any other way apart from watching them do it, having them teach me, working out mistakes and challenges on the fly while I tried it too. Sally Ann's tallow basting, Martha's careful pastry brushing to stop caramel crystallising, and Kevin's aggressive focaccia smacking. I'm just not sure that I could have got them right out of a book or watching YouTube. I've never really done a cooking or baking class before. I'm quite resolutely self-taught in most of the things that I do with my time. But recently I've begun to notice and to consider the limitations of learning in this way for me personally, and to think more about the value of physically handing down or receiving knowledge and skills in the presence of other people. What do you think the value was in learning those skills in the environment that you did, like in such a hands-on way? Because I sort of feel like we're in this age where, in theory, you can kind of learn anything from a book or from a YouTube video, but it's actually like, in practice, I don't know if that's true. So I was interested to know what your thoughts are on that in terms of like bread and patisserie in particular.
I think like it is amazing the amount of information there is online now, and actually how accessible a lot of it is. But I think and actually I've learned so much from online. Like I took apart a gearbox of a mixer because it was broken, and I was like, well, I found a YouTube video, I may as well follow it.
Martha,
I stripped
oh my
out
God.
this gearbox of a mix. I stripped out the gearbox of a mixer. I found a broken cog. I ordered the part, and then I literally just watched the YouTube video in reverse to put it back together.
Well, that's incredible.
And it worked. So totally, it's something that is completely methodical, and there is effectively one way of doing something. I think that is the great thing about kind of like online learning. I think food, and especially baking, there is just so many variables. And if you're watching, even if you're reading a recipe in a book or you're following a method on a video, you are reading or seeing a single kind of way that you can do that process. And actually, there are so many variables, whether it's the temperature of your kitchen or the equipment that you're using, or the heat of your hands, or how strong your fingers are. There's so many variables. And also what you're seeing is the very best outcome for that person, or that person who's produced that product or that recipe. And there's so much in between. And just because it doesn't turn out that way doesn't mean that it's wrong or bad or it's not going to taste nice. But there's that, I haven't reached that perfection, that goal, I think, a lot of the time when you're looking at online things, especially on social media. Whereas I think learning in an environment that is not only face-to-face teaching, but in a group situation where you're learning with other people, you see all that grey area, and you kind of can really dissect what's happened and evaluate and problem solve. I think it's that problem solving brain, especially with bakery, that is so essential, whether it's at home or whether you're baking professionally. And I think that's so hard to understand solo when you're kind of at home learning, and just being able to see the different outputs and then be like, what happened here? Do you know what I mean? Just seeing the variation, I think, alone is so useful.
I hadn't actually thought about it from that angle, and that's so true. Like the idea that, you're reducing the process to its outcome or its output only, but actually in learning, the benefit is, what you're figuring out along the way. That reminds me of when we made the honeycomb, and I instantly was just like, oh, ours doesn't look like Martha's, so something must have gone wrong. And that's exactly how I would have reacted if I'd made that at home and I'd watched a video or like seen a picture or whatever. I would have been like, oh, mine's bad. But then you were like, it just like, it's going to look fine on the inside. It's just the bubbles on the top aren't that big. And like just even having like there are actually different ways for this to look, and like this might be the reason why this has happened. Yeah, it's hard to troubleshoot in that way, I think, independently. So it's really valuable to have that experience in the room.
I think reassurance is a massive thing that you get from a face-to-face teacher. Like I was teaching Fred last weekend, and you know, quite a few people were being like, mine looks different to yours when we were kneading our dough. And just for me to be able to go, cool, you need mine now and I'll need yours, just so we can both feel each other's dough. And then instantly they touched it and they're like, oh, yeah, they feel the same. And it's like, yeah, they do. It's just, when you've been baking for a while, you just get non-stick hands. It's just like magically happens one day and you're like, dough doesn't stick to you in the same way as it does when you're learning.
Oh my God.
Like, mine looked smoother and, you know, and kind of different from other people's, but it was just because I was touching the dough in a slightly different way to stop it looking as sticky. Do you know what I mean? And it's that kind of, you can go into instant kind of like spiral of like, mine is going wrong at home, when actually it could be exactly like the tutors in terms of like quality or texture.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Did you have any experiences? I mean, I guess it's quite a while ago now and a lot has happened, but did you have any experiences like that when you were learning?
Yeah, I definitely remember watching our tutor kind of, I think it was just like pre-shaping dough and it just wasn't sticking to his hands. And I was just like, how is this possible? It's like, it's magic. Like, what the hell? It was so, yeah. Or looking into a mixer as a dough was developing and like our tutor Wayne would be kind of describing what he was seeing. And I was like, I literally have no clue how he can like, it's like he's dough whispering and he understands the dough from seeing it. Whereas at the time, it just looked like lots of ingredients sloshing around a mixing bowl to me. Whereas I now have that knowledge. And that comes from things being pointed out to you as you learn and from repetition and kind of, knowing the process through to the end and then being able to start to see that development, you know, earlier in the process. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I have like strong memories of being told things and kind of not being able to see them at the time. And now it's something that like I'm probably doing to other people by just saying, look, you can see it being doing this, and they're nodding along and I'm thinking, do you know? It's all right, but I'm going to tell you anyway.
And one day you'll look back on this moment and be like...
Yeah, totally. I think I'm a really practical and visual learner. And I actually think it really helps me then learn in a more academic way if I've had an experience of the process. I really struggle to learn completely theoretically about anything, but once I have a bit of an experience of something, I can then read and devour information written that I would not have been able to do before.
I think somehow I had thought of the school in quite a romanticised way because I had decided that I wanted to tell this story about learning how to make food in a hands-on way and that being embodied, sensual almost. And I think this made sense when Martha and I had a conversation because of her personal experiences and approach to learning alongside her professional experience. And this was linked in my mind to the idea of skills we used to have relating to food making and production that stopped being passed down for one reason or another. Quite often when I'm making something for Lecker, I'm slightly unclear about what it is, what my point even is. Everything I make starts with being curious about something. But generally, I begin working on it without knowing fully what I actually want to say about it. Quite like starting here, although it can feel very uncertain. It's fun. It's satisfying when it comes together, sometimes against the odds, or so it feels. And generally, I'm kind of lucky, or cocky, I suppose, enough to figure it out on the fly, and then it all comes out in the wash. But sometimes this approach results in asking interviewees questions that are extremely confusing to them. When I interviewed Alison Swan Parenti, the founder of the School of Artisan Food, we found ourselves slightly at cross purposes, because what I was asking her about what the school did and the basis on which it was founded just didn't make sense to her at all.
I'm not quite sure what you're asking me there. Are you asking me?
I guess just, how can I rephrase it more? It was more just coming off the back of not necessarily knowing how the passing of information previously happened when it came to learning how to make things. And was that a gap that you wanted to fill?
Yes, it was. But when I started the School of Artisan Food, it really wasn't about cooking skills. It was about making skills, really. And that sounds a bit kind of prissy to put it that way. But I was quite interested in mass production. It was to do with how to make bread for the sake of making a staple. And so really what I've always been interested in is establishing small businesses with what we produce, what we teach in the school. So it really is roots into work. So it's so that you can work in somebody else's small business, or you can start a small business of your own. So it's much more that than domestic cooking. The first thing we thought of was teaching people how to make food that's going to produce a living for them, that's a kind of dignified living, and a living that is both creative and pretty helpful to other people, and good fun, and producing, it's good for the culture really to have nice food that tastes nice. It's what's wrong with that? I didn't have very much to do with schools or artisan food before I founded the school. I was a child psychotherapist and I worked in the National Health Service. But it is actually a very logical progression from being a child psychotherapist to opening a food school. Because one of the things that I found working with challenging and difficult and usually very nice adolescents was that they were very much helped by having something to do, and that something that they could really succeed in. And so one of the reasons that I started the School of Artisan Food was to do with providing routes into work for people who find it hard to get that together. When we were founded, we really thought we were going to be teaching fermentation more than anything else. And if you think about it, what we're doing is thinking about fermentation a lot. We're thinking about the way that bread is made through a fermentation process. Cheese, clearly, there's even a little bit of fermentation in salamis and things like that. So really, in a way, one of the benefits is really exposing people to the miracles of nature in a way. Just how if you put several ingredients together, they produce these wonderful, very simple ways to feed you and help make you healthy. But they are very simple. I think that one of the benefits that we can pass on is that good food is actually incredibly simple. One of the things was just a scarcity of skills. I'd started a bakery. We wanted to make long fermentation breads, and there was very, very few people in the country at that point, it's hard to believe now, who knew how to do it. There were 2 bakeries in London that were producing artisan bread. There was Andrew Whitley up in Melmerby in Cumberland producing artisan bread, and there were very, very few other people doing it, and they didn't know how to do it or where they should be doing it. So a school was really a place to teach methods that were really dying out. And we managed to do that, actually. As soon as we built the school, it became clear that it was a place for people who had really wanted to pass on their skills, but didn't have the infrastructure in order to do that. And so we built, we had a capital project building the building, but we also, put in place a booking system and all of those things, which did make it much easier for people. So partly I started the school to provide a place where people could teach rather than a place where people could learn. So it was obviously started with both of those, but the teaching as being a very kind of primary motivation.
That's really interesting. And I suppose, obviously, the side advantage is that you would have access to great bread, which, if that's something that you were keen to eat, that feels like a great... Was this something that you had learned to make yourself in the process of setting up the school?
I'd learned to make good bread a long time ago in America. I was living in a communal household. Lots of people in the household baked bread. The men baked the bread, and so it was quite inspiring. And it was pretty good bread. It wasn't actually really good bread that we made. It was yeasted. It wasn't long fermentation, but it was much, much better than anything that you could buy in a supermarket. I'm really keen on that still being something that's in the general culture, you know. But the school itself, the thing that differentiates itself from, or differentiates the school from other places, is really that we're interested in pre-industrial techniques with food. That's what artisan skills are, really. They're skills that have a lot to do with knowing where things come from, knowing the feel of things, knowing how to make them, knowing what their history is, and all of those things.
It's funny listening back to this, having finally worked out what the episode is about, and considering that Alison had just carefully explained to me that her work with the school had been entirely business focused, I still just couldn't help myself trying to burrow in her personal story, searching for hints of skills being passed down hand to hand. I think it's really because I, like so many of us, have such an emotional connection to making food. And also, it's not how I make my living day to day, which probably allows me to rose tint it slightly, or quite a lot. And I'm so grateful to Alison for being so generous in really listening to me, really deeply considering the angle that I was trying to come from, but then very clearly clarifying and explaining her position and the school's so clearly. I learnt a lot from it. And she actually did reflect a lot more on her personal experiences of learning to cook too.
We were talking about the difference between learning about food from other people and in the company of other people, and learning about food remotely and through cookbooks, and what those differences are. And I was thinking about it, and I think that I learned some of my actual cooking skills from cookbooks, much more than any other way, because, you know, everybody has their own cookbook, but people love a particular cookbook that's helped them along. And mine was Julia Child. So I just loved following those recipes, because she goes, and then you do this, and then you get this wooden spoon, and then you do this. And in the end, it's pretty good food. So she's a fantastically good step-by-step tutor. And I did really enjoy doing that on my own and making the mistakes. So having classes is a very, very different thing. There's much more to a class in a way. There's much more in terms of human contact. There's much more in the way of being able to share with people how things feel and how things taste. But I actually think both of them are very good ways to learn to make food, and that a cookbook, in a way, on your own is one thing, and a cooking class is an entirely different thing. And both of them are pretty good. I'm pretty old. I'm a post-war baby, and the women of my mother's generation had learned to cook in quite a creative way, because they didn't have much to cook with. They remembered rationing. They remembered actually cooking a lot of stuff from allotments and gardens. And so the kind of cooking that I learned was pretty frugal. And that was a great influence on me. But also there was another influence, which was the kind of wonderful 50s cooking that went on in my mother's kitchen. If she gave a dinner party, every day she would cook wonderful, kind of, you know, good, wholesome food. But a dinner party was an entirely different matter.
What would she make?
Baked grapefruit with a glacé cherry on the top, first course. Second course, either kebabs made with a tent peg. Do you remember those kind of metal screw tent pegs? Lamb, and then a pepper, which was really unusual. I mean, you had to go to Worthing to get a pepper. Then a bit of tomato and a mushroom. and straight into the oven. So that was a very sophisticated second course. Or there was also tuna bake, which you make by putting 1 can of tuna, 1 can of Campbell's mushroom soup, 1 packet of crisps, and a lot of mousetrap cheese on the top. Again, in the oven, success. And I can't remember what her desserts were. By that time, you were you're completely floored.
The tent peg kebab is inspired. I love that.
It's very good. And then she also had some very good cookbooks, really, to speak to what you're interested in today. So she did actually, I don't think my mother ever went to a cooking class. She was quite competitive with her other friends, so they would talk about cooking. But she did have the cookbooks that everybody had. There was Constance Spry's cooking. She also had the Penguin Elizabeth David cookbooks. And she taught herself from those, and she taught herself very well from those.
It's really interesting that you talk about her learning from books, I guess, rather than from her parents. I mean, obviously, I don't want to make any assumptions about what her relationship with her parents were like, but that in context of what you're saying about pre-industrial food is quite interesting, that there almost has the passing down of information from generation to generation hasn't always been that fluid or seamless.
I don't know where she learned to cook or what her relationship was with her mother. She never talked about her mother or what her relationship was with her mother's cooking. She talked about her mother, but she never talked about the food that her mother made.
To come back to this idea of creating routes into work, this was something Martha, somewhat unexpectedly to her, put to practice very, very quickly into her time at the school.
A few months after the course, or even while the course was going on, I actually kind of found a shop in Sheffield, and you had to write a business plan as part of the course, and kind of was like, oh, we'll look at rents, we'll look at shops and see what's around, and it kind of turned from a complete made-up scenario to actually a reality.
That's
so
amazing.
Yeah, I went from not thinking, it's a bit kind of ridiculous, I think, and not the ideal way to start a business. I think go and work in bakeries, get lots of professional experience, make mistakes in other people's businesses, do you know what I mean? Rather than your own. But yeah, so I left the course in July 2012 and opened in in November 2012. So I actually kind of got the keys literally a month after leaving. And yeah, I opened up tiny bakery. It was kind of in a retail shop. So it was all one space. So I wasn't kind of having to bake somewhere else and then transport it. It was just a single room. Everyone could see the process. Everyone could see what was going on. But that kind of felt manageable. It wasn't big, scary rent, big, scary production unit. So yeah, set up, was in that shop for 2 years, moved to a bigger premises, opened a cafe, opened kind of a restaurant-y cafe upstairs, expanded into the shop next door, did bread classes and supper clubs and pizza nights and markets, and it just kind of grew organically over time. And actually a lot of what I enjoyed about it was the business development, as well as the kind of, I guess there's that creativity in that, and then there's also the creativity in the production and the product development, and they were the two things that I kind of loved the most. It was never that I was particularly interested in being a business owner. That was just a thing that happened, and quite significantly as well. Yeah, so I did that for 10 years, kind of had 30 staff, kind of across 3 floors of a building and out in the yard, and everyone was kind of packed into whatever little space we could have. And yeah, ran through COVID really well, but I think that really kind of weighed on me and took it out of me. And while I really I had so many exciting grand plans for the business, I think I kind of got to the point where I was like, I think I probably need to start thinking about life outside of the bakery and what else I could do or have headspace for. So yeah, I sold it after 10 years. had a bit of time off, and then found myself back at the school last summer, so kind of summer 2023, saying, what kind of jobs have you got? Have you got anything? Like, I'm just quite interested in, like, I could just come and help out, or is there teaching? And then they were like, oh, actually, we need a patisserie and viennoiserie teacher on our foundation degree. And so I was like, amazing, that sounds great. So I've been back at the school since last summer, teaching, but also working as a technician, kind of supporting other tutors on courses, doing that kind of organisation. And I've really enjoyed both. I really enjoy that kind of organisation side, and I guess I know what teachers need because I'm also doing the teaching, which is a really nice balance.
And so when you started teaching, what was that like to go from kind of student to teacher?
I think it definitely, again, took me a little while to really understand the kind of points in the day where, like, someone was going to go and do something before I'd said, and that you need to kind of catch those or give those little tidbits of advice, like, before something happens. Because it's not like if you're stood in front of a class and you're saying things to people and you're hoping that they understand, or you're kind of thinking they are. When you're teaching a practical class, everyone has to go away with a product. And actually, if someone is falling behind, you can't just abandon them. Do you know what I mean? It's like we've got to move as fast as the slowest person in the room, which is totally fine. And actually, there's a problem with being effectively too quick and not listening at the same time. So it was a massive learning experience for me, but also I guess I knew what had been useful for me when I was learning, so I could kind of try and impart that. Yeah, like I even think that from when I was learning, I remember kind of scribbles on bits of paper that tutors did to describe kind of fermentation or a wheatberry, and like every single class I would draw the same image that I think is probably ingrained in my brain from when I was learning.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean to say that everyone in the room learns the same way as I do. So I think you've really got to have a range of ways of explaining things or demoing things. And that's also the nice thing about being in person. You know, if something's not working for you, the teacher should really be able to be like, okay, try this instead, and offer that range of different methods and techniques, because there is so many in bread and everyone probably teaches in a different way, and everything will kind of, things will click for people, I think, in a different way.
What is it, do you think, that makes people really good at that?
I don't know. I think some people are good at teaching and some people aren't good at teaching. I mean, I think that's true. If you go to any school in the country, you'll see there are good teachers and not such good teachers. But I think in order to even begin to be a good teacher, you have to really be interested in your subject and like your subject. And you have to be able to transmit that enthusiasm and all of those feelings about what you're doing to other people. One of the things we've been incredibly lucky about with this school is that the people who started teaching here really from the beginning started teaching because they really loved their subject and they really didn't want to leave the world without having taught it to other people, taught their skills to other people. And so we've pretty much always had very good, very enthusiastic teachers.
I think I agree with this idea that some people are good at teaching and some people aren't. And I also think that some people love to learn and some people aren't that bothered. For the people that love to learn, for them, us maybe, would I tentatively say this about myself? It's impossible to ever really stop wanting to learn new things, to throw yourself into them. Martha's back in the classroom herself. You've now gone back to learning full-time again. What prompted the decision to study interior architecture?
I think, so I guess I ended up doing a lot of it in my own business. A lot of people, I don't know how, a lot of people seemingly have the money to employ kind of interior design stuff, but like I didn't. But also I really wanted to do it. I really enjoyed designing the spaces, even the kind of really functional spaces, the kitchens, and working out the workflows and how we could be efficient, because We weren't in a big kind of rectangular warehousey type shape. We were in kind of small old terrace shops where it was really important to be. I just think I really enjoyed getting geeky with it and working out tessellation of how things would fit together. And actually, as part of the kind of application for uni, I had to write a personal statement, and I am really terrible at writing anything like that or about myself. But it was quite weirdly cathartic to think back and think, actually, food and design or spaces have always been really part of my existence, even as like a child. Like, I designed my room when I was 11 and picked all the colours and the furniture, and then when I was 14 I wanted to move into a bigger room downstairs, so I was like saved up and bought the furniture. Like, I pored over the IKEA catalogue when I was like in my early teens and would kind of draw over furniture and then like redesign it. And I just hadn't really thought that was not a strange thing to do, but like an interest. It was just something that I did. And then when I look back, I was like, oh, actually, maybe I've actually been into this for quite a while. And yeah, I didn't finish my A-levels because I started to feel unwell after GCSEs at about 16. And then it took a year and a half, but I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue.
Oh, God.
And so actually, when everyone else was going out into the world and going to uni, my kind of life and world shrunk quite a lot. And actually then home became really important.
Right.
And it was where I could create things and where it was the thing that I had control of, I guess. So actually cooking and my house or my interior space, was the thing that I had access to, which now makes a lot of sense that maybe that's why I'm interested.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
I'm also very affected by spaces, whether it's like architecture or the design of things or the feel of things. I think that's always part of my part of the world that I kind of feel and see. I see the like little things, and so it's quite nice to be delving into that now, but definitely feels related.
You have been doing this work with the school for quite a while now, and on sort of reflecting back, what do you think was it about everything you'd learned as a psychotherapist that made it such a logical step?
I think that I'm very interested in what makes people tick, but I'm particularly interested in the social conditions, not just the emotional conditions, but the social conditions that make people tick. Because I started off as a psychotherapist working with children, but then I did a lot of work with the Women's Therapy Centre in London. And so that was it was founded in the late 70s, and we were a particularly feminist enterprise. We were thinking about women's psychology, not just because of parental influences and psychodynamic influences, but also the social influences that meant that women were showing so many more psychiatric symptoms under certain conditions. And so we were thinking that if you're thinking about women's psychology, you have to think about it in a social context and in a political context. And I think that I've always been interested in looking at food in the same kind of way, that it isn't just for eating. You have to look at how it's produced, why it's produced, who it's produced by, and think about it both socially and politically in order to understand how to get rid of barriers to health and to think about how we can think about, for example, the food system and how it affects things like climate. All of these things are not just to do with eating or farming or producing food. They're to do with big systems. And I don't think you can teach the slightest thing around food without knowing a lot about its context. So I think that's a really tortuous way to go from psychotherapy to food. But it is to do with thinking about very visceral things, which is how we feel and but also to think about how many different influences there are over those primary processes.
Lecker is hosted and produced by me, Lucy Dearlove. Thanks to Martha Brown and Alison Swan Parenti for being part of this episode, And also to Sally Ann Hunt, Kevin Roberts and everyone else at the School of Artisan Food, especially Emily Leary, who organised us all being there on the day that we were invited. It was such a great day, I loved it. You can find out more about the School of Artisan Food and the courses they run on their website, as well as the diplomas and longer courses. They do lots of short half-day courses in things like ice cream and pork pie making, not together yet. And just I think it would just be a great way to spend a bit of time in the beautiful countryside where the school is on the Welbeck estate. There are also still places on this year's 4-week summer school, though accommodation's now full. You can still do it as a non-residential student. It takes place in July and August and is led by the 3 tutors that we met, Martha Brown, Sally Ann Hunt and Kevin Roberts. So we'll cover lots of fascinating stuff relating to meat, wheat and dairy. Again, you can find out more about that on the School of Artisan Food website, and if you're interested, get a move on because I think there's only a few places left. The music in this episode is by Blue Dot Sessions. Before I go, one reminder that you can sign up as a paid subscriber to support Lecker on Apple Podcasts, Patreon, and now on Substack too. Links are in the show notes. Hello to any paid subscribers who are listening here. I'm so grateful for your support. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for listening. I'll be back very soon.